I'm a 40-year-old man, and up until about 6 weeks ago, I was married to my wife. She was 37. We had been together for nearly 12 years, just a few months away from our anniversary, when she passed away. She had been fighting leukemia for 5 long years. Despite how tough it was, she faced it head-on. I was by her side through it all, taking care of her day in and day out. I have no regrets. I did everything I could, and I know she knew that. Before she got sick, my wife was a writer. She had written a few stories and had a small but loyal following, though it didn't bring in much income. So, she eventually started ghostwriting, and that's where she made a significant amount of money. I run a bookstore myself, not wildly successful, but it keeps me comfortable. In her will, she left me the majority of her assets, which ended up being about $750,000 after paying off her medical bills. She left her family $75,000, and even that felt generous considering the circumstances. Her relationship with them had always been strained. During her final weeks in the hospital, they barely made an appearance. They only ever called when they needed money, and she always gave them what they asked for. But I think, as the end drew near, she started to see them more clearly, for what they were. That realization led her to revise her will and reduce what she originally intended to leave them. Her family consists of her parents and 2 younger brothers, both in their late 30s. One helps run the family diner, and the other is employed at a law firm. Anyway, just last week, they showed up at my place, completely unannounced, and said they had something urgent to talk about. Given how little I'd heard from them during her illness or even after the funeral, I was immediately suspicious. Once we sat down, they pulled out a stack of papers, letters, notices, things like that. Apparently, word of her passing had spread, and now a handful of creditors were coming forward, claiming she owed them money. They said I was responsible for clearing these debts, or I could face legal trouble. To say I was blindsided would be an understatement. As far as I knew, my wife didn't owe anyone a thing. We lived within our means and didn't need to borrow money. I couldn't wrap my head around it. Her family insisted that she had borrowed quite a bit while living apart from me and had asked them not to tell me. According to them, the debt had grown to about $100,000 over time, mostly due to interest, and now the creditors were hounding them for repayment. They claimed they couldn't afford it and wanted me to cover it instead. I was stunned. Sure, I could technically afford to pay it off, but it would take a serious chunk out of what she left me. And more importantly, I just couldn't believe that the woman I knew, so careful, so responsible, would leave behind a mess like this. There was a short window of time, just before we met, when my wife had been living on her own after moving out of her parents' house. She had mentioned how hard those days were. Back then, she hadn't found success yet as a writer and was juggling multiple tutoring jobs just to keep the lights on. That part all lined up with what I knew. She had been open about her early struggles, even the financial ones. But not once in all our years together did she ever mention taking out loans or owing anyone money. So, when her family dropped this bombshell on me, I was stunned. The idea that she'd kept something this big from me, it just didn't sit right. They wanted the money in cash, too, which made the whole thing feel even more suspicious. I told them I needed time to sort things out. They didn't say much, but I could tell they weren't pleased. They gave me a week. The very next day, still unsettled, I reached out to my wife's longtime assistant, someone who had helped manage her schedule and finances. I laid everything out, the surprise visit, the debt claims, the letters. Her reaction told me everything I needed to know. She was just as confused and shocked as I was. According to her, my wife didn't leave behind a single unpaid debt. She said everything had been handled before her passing. That only deepened my doubts. The debt notices, themselves, raised red flags. They weren't official documents, mostly shady letters full of vague threats and warnings about how it would be unwise to avoid settling things, now that they knew where to find us. Most of them came from loan sharks. And because of that, I had no real way of verifying anything. For a moment, I considered just paying off her family and washing my hands of the whole thing. But something in my gut told me this wasn't about my wife's debts, it was about greed. I decided to get a second opinion from someone who knew her best, her cousin, who was also her closest friend. She didn't hold back. What she told me erased any remaining doubt. She said those papers were likely forged. Her parents had been eyeing her money for years, especially once her ghostwriting career took off. In fact, she hadn't left home willingly, she was thrown out. After college, she had announced her plans to become a writer, and her parents didn't take it well. They didn't believe it was a real job. After a series of explosive arguments, they told her not to come back until she was earning enough to impress them. It crushed her, but she didn't fold. She built herself up from the ground, working tables, tutoring, writing in every spare moment. She never accepted help and never borrowed money. She was entirely self-made. Her cousin was absolutely certain her parents were lying and manipulating me. She urged me to speak with my lawyer and to test her theory. She suggested I refuse to give the money to her family, and say I'd handle everything directly with the alleged lenders. So, I took her advice. When I broke the news to her family, their reaction said it all. They were furious. They insisted the money had to go through them, that I clearly didn't trust them, and accused me of disrespecting my wife's memory. But to me, they'd already lost whatever trust one had left. Their reaction sealed it for me. Every doubt I'd had was confirmed. They were lying, without a doubt. I handed everything over to my lawyer to verify, and within a few days he came back with the truth. Every one of the so-called lenders they had listed, these supposed loan sharks, had been contacted. Not a single one had ever even heard of my wife, let alone loaned her money. She was completely in the clear. I was stunned. Just weeks after losing her, her own family was trying to scam me, her grieving husband, out of money. It was one of the lowest things I've ever experienced. And the worst part? If they had simply come to me honestly and asked for help, I probably would have given it to them. I have more than enough to live comfortably. But instead, they chose to lie. They tried to manipulate me. And worst of all, they tried to tarnish her name, painting her as reckless and dishonest. That I could never forgive. They've been trying to reach me ever since, but I haven't responded. I don't even know what I'd say. The truth is, they were never truly there for her. They barely checked in when she was sick, and now they were trying to profit from her death. In my opinion, even the $75,000 she left them was too generous. I've been seriously considering cutting them off completely, and even taking legal action to reclaim what they were given. There are others, friends and people who stood by her in her final days, who could make much better use of that money. Update 1. I finally answered one of their calls. It was my father-in-law. He jumped straight into asking when I'd be handing over the money, still keeping up the lie about being harassed by debt collectors. But by now I knew the truth. I told him plainly that I'd spoken to my lawyer and had confirmed that the documents were fake. The loan sharks never existed. I expected him to deny it, and he did, at first, acting like I was the one who had lost my mind. But I stood firm, and eventually he cracked. He admitted to lying. But then came the guilt-tripping. He said it was unfair that my wife had left the bulk of her estate to me, and not to them. That they were the ones who raised her. That they helped make her who she was. That they deserved more. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Yes, they raised her, but they were also the ones who threw her out of their home when she dared to follow her dream of becoming a writer. They didn't support her when she was struggling, and they only came back into her life when her books started selling. Even then, they treated her like a bank, not a daughter. They didn't sit by her bedside when she was dying. They didn't help with the funeral. And yet they thought they were owed more? I told him, point blank, that they wouldn't see another cent from me. Not now, not ever. Then I informed him that I was suing them for the inheritance money. He exploded with anger, tried to argue, but I'd had enough. I hung up. I blocked them all. I told my lawyer to move ahead with filing the lawsuit immediately. Today, they were officially served, and unsurprisingly, they didn't take it well. They made their displeasure loud and clear by showing up at my doorstep, hoping to guilt me into backing down. I couldn't believe they actually had the audacity to come to my home after trying to scam me. I didn't even bother opening the door. I told them through the intercom to leave me alone. But they were persistent, insisting they just wanted to talk. It was my father-in-law and his wife, both trying their best to look devastated. I guess they thought that if they played the grieving parents hard enough, I'd cave. They whined about how heartbroken they were and how losing all that money on top of their daughter was just too much to bear. But I knew better. They treated my wife like an ATM while she was alive. She may have forgiven them, because they were her blood, but I didn't owe them that grace. They were never my family, and I felt no need to keep pretending. After they finished their little performance, I told them clearly and firmly, I wasn't changing my mind. If they didn't leave, I'd call the police. That didn't sit well with them. My mother-in-law launched into a lecture about family values, accusing me of turning my back on them when we should be mourning together, not fighting over petty things like money. That was rich, coming from the same people who had fabricated debt collectors and tried to trick me out of my inheritance. Suddenly now they wanted to talk about family? About loyalty? They'd shown none of that when my wife was dying in a hospital bed without so much as a visit from them. I told them again, leave, or the cops would make sure they did. They finally got the message, but not without some parting shots. They warned me that I would lose. That they'd make sure of it. But I didn't care about winning. This wasn't about the money. It was about defending my wife's dignity. She had always been too forgiving to confront them. I wasn't. And now that she was gone, I didn't feel the need to fake smiles or keep ties with people who were clearly nothing but leeches. They fed off her success when she was alive, and now they were trying to do the same after her death. This ends now. Update 3. Our first hearing took place today. I'd be lying if I said it was easy. It felt surreal, sitting across from the people who had made my wife's life harder and now had the nerve to paint me as the villain. Part of me wondered if my wife would have wanted this. If she'd have preferred I let things go. But then I remembered how they treated her, even in her final weeks. That thought gave me clarity. Right from the start, I laid it all out, the way they forged documents, tried to deceive me, and nearly pulled off a scam while I was still grieving. They didn't deny it. In fact, they admitted to it, probably hoping to win the court's sympathy by turning themselves into victims of a different kind. Their lawyer tried to spin a new narrative, that I had manipulated their daughter into rewriting her will in my favor. That I had taken advantage of her illness to isolate her from her family, and keep her money for myself. I expected lies, but still, hearing it out loud was infuriating. They painted me as some controlling husband who orchestrated everything for financial gain. But thankfully, my lawyer was prepared. Everyone in that courtroom could already tell how far-fetched their story was, but now, we get to prove it, piece by piece. And that, I'm more than ready to do. They really should have thought twice before picking this fight. They could say whatever they wanted about me, it didn't matter. Everyone who truly knew us, from our closest friends to the few relatives of my wife who still had a heart, had seen the truth with their own eyes. The version of me they were painting in court wasn't going to hold up against the actual evidence, or the testimony of the people who had been around. After the hearing, my in-laws tried once more to persuade me to drop the lawsuit. They acted like it was just a disagreement we could sweep under the rug. But I wasn't going to let it go. If I backed off now, it would send a message that their manipulation and harassment could continue unchecked, just like they did with my wife when she was alive. I told them they could spin whatever stories they wanted, but the truth always finds a way out. I wasn't afraid of them, and I sure as hell wasn't backing down. Then their sons, my wife's brothers, came at me for disrespecting their parents. I didn't even waste my breath responding. I got in my car and drove off. We'd be seeing each other in court again in 2 weeks. And by then, I'd have every piece of proof I needed to blow their lies out of the water. Honestly, it wouldn't even be hard. Update 4. It's only been 2 days since the hearing, and already they've tried something unbelievably stupid, only to have it backfire spectacularly. It was just past midnight last night when I thought I heard footsteps outside. I brushed it off, assuming I was just exhausted. But about an hour later, I was jolted awake by the sound of glass shattering and loud bangs coming from outside. I waited a few minutes until I was sure I heard other neighbors talking and stepping outside. When I finally went to check, I found out that someone had smashed all the windows of my neighbor's car with rocks. On the rocks were messages scrawled in white chalk. Back off. It didn't take a genius to figure out who was behind it. It was so dumb it was almost laughable. They got the wrong car. Mine was in the garage, but my neighbor, a young single mom in her 20s, always parks in the driveway while her garage is under renovation. She just bought that car a few weeks ago and was so proud of it. Now it was wrecked, and she was devastated, crying even after the police had been called. I felt terrible. I explained to her what likely happened. My wife's brothers were trying to send me a message and just smashed the wrong car. I offered to pay for the damage, but she told me not to worry. She said she'd handle it. She planned to press charges herself, and honestly, that made me feel a little better. She'd been close to my wife too, so maybe that's why she was so understanding. About 15 minutes later, the police arrived. I explained everything and gave them the address of my wife's brothers. Another neighbor offered to stay with the toddler while the child's mom and I went down to the station. The arrest didn't take long. Even though the brothers tried to resist and thought I wouldn't have the nerve to involve the police, they were clearly not expecting the cops to show up so quickly. They even tried to run. One of them attempted to climb down a fire escape, and the other tried to shove past the officers. It was pathetic. And once they saw me at the station? Well, let's just say their expression said it all. They screamed at me in the police station, accusing me of killing their sister, as if shouting at me would somehow fix the situation they'd gotten themselves into. Their rage was explosive and childish, like they thought some dramatic outburst could undo the damage they'd caused or paint them as victims. But my neighbor had already pressed charges, clearly identified them as the ones responsible, and the evidence was stacked against them. We were free to go. I got home about an hour ago, and haven't slept a wink since. My nerves are shot. I just want this nightmare to be over. I want them gone. I want peace. Update 5. It's been 3 weeks since the last update, and for once, I have some real closure to share. My in-laws no longer have the $75,000 that my wife had left them in her will. They were forced to settle and return every last cent to me. On top of that, they had to pay my neighbor for the damage to her car, courtesy of their son's boneheaded attempt at intimidation. Those same brothers now have criminal records, and their actions help prove exactly what I'd been saying all along. This wasn't grief. It was greed, plain and simple. The case was strong from the start, so the court's ruling wasn't a surprise. But the silence afterward? That was unexpected. My in-laws haven't tried to reach out since the judgment, and honestly? Good riddance. I don't need people like that orbiting my life anymore. But like I said from the beginning, I never wanted that money for myself. I have more than enough to live comfortably. What mattered to me was justice for my wife and making sure that the people who actually loved her got something back for the love and loyalty they gave. So, I divided the money up and gave it to those who truly mattered. First, I paid her secretary, a woman my wife always said was more like a sister than a colleague. She tried to decline the money, said she couldn't possibly accept something like that. But I insisted. My wife would have wanted her to have it, no question. Eventually, she accepted it, teary-eyed and quiet. Then there was my wife's cousin. She drove 2 hours every weekend just to visit her in the hospital, never missing a single one. Always smiling, always positive, like she was trying to keep the light burning even when everything felt dark. I gave her a check too, and thanked her for always showing up. I've only seen her cry twice, once at the funeral, and once when I handed her that check. It's been emotional, so much more than I thought it would be. But it also feels right. I followed through on something my wife would have done herself, had she been here. I hope wherever she is now, she knows that I did this for her. That I stood up when she no longer could. That I tried my best to protect the life and love she built, even after she was gone. And I hope she's at peace. Finally. And here's what I'll tell you at the very end. You watch this story to the end, it means only one thing: this video format suits you. You should subscribe to the channel to continue listening to similar stories in this format.